My dear friends and my dear students, today I am going to discuss regarding paying banker and collecting bank. This is the third unit which has been prescribed by the Karnataka Institute Dharwad for the Bcom fourth semester. First of all, we shall discuss about the paying banker. The paying banker is one on whom the check has been drawn and is required to make the payment of the check. The paying banker is also called as a dry bank. Why the paying banker is called as a dry banker? It is a question. Because he is a banker on whom the check has been drawn and is required to make the payment of the customer's check. One of the statutory obligation on the part of the paying banker is to honor the customer's check drawn upon him by the customers. This obligation of the paying banker is very crucial and it is delicate and complicated also. It is just like that of a person who is in between the devil and the deep sea. Why the position of the paying banker has been well compared to the one who is in between the devil and the deep sea? The reason is, when a paying banker honors the customer check without having sufficient balance in the bank account of the customers, he has to lose the money. In case if the paying banker dishonors the customer check, even when there is a sufficient credit balance in the bank account of the customer and is available for payment of the customer's check, in such a situation, the paying banker has to face the risk. As the paying banker, he is exposed to some risk while making payment of the customer check. He has to take certain precautions. Why the paying banker has to take some precautions? Because he has an obligation on his part to honor the customer check. Even this obligation was insisted by Section 31 of the Indian Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. What is the provision of Section 31 of the Indian Negotiable Instrument Act 1881? Section 31 clearly says, when a drawee of a check, that means a paying banker, when a drawee of a check is having the sufficient funds to the credit of the drawer and properly applicable for the payment of the customer check, must have to do so. That means must have to make the payment of the customer check, failing which the drawee of the check will be liable to the drawer of the check. So the implication of this section is that when the banker has got sufficient balance to the credit of the customer's account and is also available for payment of the customer check, he must have to make the payment of the customer check when it is being presented. In case if he dishonors the customer check without any valid reason, in such a situation, the paying banker will be held liable to compensate the customers. As the paying banker is exposed to some risk in connection with the payment of the customer check, he has to take number of the precautions when the check is presented for payment, because the precaution is better than cure. That is the old maxim is there in the daily life. What are those precautions? The first and the foremost important precaution the paying banker has to take when the check is presented, the paying banker has to see that whether the check has been drawn by the customer in the proper form. What is that proper form? Proper form It is the prescribed printed form which is supplied by the banker to the customers. That means the banker should make the payment of the customer check only when the check presented by the customer is a printed check form supplied by the banker to the customer. Check form supplied to another customer cannot be used by some other customer to draw the money from his bank account. This is one of the important precautions. In case if the check is not drawn in the proper form, the check should be returned by the banker without making its payment. Then the second important precaution, that is the date of the check, is very important. When the check is presented for payment, the paying banker should have to see that whether the date of the check is written or not. In case if the date of the check is not written, it should be returned with a remark as undated a check. Date of the check is written, no doubt. The paying banker has to see that whether the date of the check has been written properly or not. The properly written dated check is one which includes the day on which the check is issued, the month during which the check is issued, and the year in which the check is issued. That means the check must be completed in all respect, and also the date of the check which is written must have to be possible date but not be an impossible date. Say for example, suppose if the check presented for payment is in the month of February, if the date of the check presented in the month of February contains the 30th of February, this is an impossible date. We cannot find the 30th in any year of the February month. This is one of the important precautions the paying banker has to observe. Another one precaution in the same, another one important point in the same precaution, the paying banker should be very careful while dealing with the stale check or post-dated check. He has to see that whether the date which is being written in the check is the duly dated check, stale check, post-dated check. If the check is a duly dated one, which is presented for payment, duly dated check is one which bears the date which is the actual date of its payment. It should be honored by the bank, provided there should be a sufficient balance in the bank account of the customer. Then secondly, if the date of the check which is written, if it is an antedated check. So what do you mean by antedated check? Antedated check is one which bears the date which is already past. All antedated checks are not invalid checks. Suppose if the check is within 3 months from the date of its issue, maybe it is an antedated check, it is a valid check for all practical purpose according to law, and it should be honored by the bank. Then another one important point to be noted in this context is whether the check presented for payment is a post-dated check. Post-dated check should not be honored by the banker before the date mentioned in the check comes. What do you mean by post-dated check? A check which bears the date which is yet to come is called as a post-dated check. When the check presented for payment is a post-dated check, it should not be honored by the banker under any circumstances. It should be returned by the banker with remark as post-dated, and asking the customer or the present bearer of the check to present that check on or after that date which is mentioned in the check. This is one of the important point to be noted in this context. Then the third important precautions to be taken by the banker is whether the check presented for payment contains the amount of the check. Amount of the check is very important. Whether the amount of the check has been written or not. If the amount of the check is not written and presented for payment, it should be returned by the bank. No doubt, the amount of the check is written. The banker has to see that whether the amount of the check is written both in words and figures or not. In case the amount of the check is written both words and figures, no doubt. But the amount written in the words and amount written in the figures does not tally with each other. In such situation, the paying banker should have to return the check with a remark as WNDFD. WNDFD remark indicates that words and figures differs. This is one of the important precaution. Then another important precaution to be taken by the banker, the paying banker has to see that whether the balance to the credit of the customer's account is sufficient to pay the customer check or not. That is very important. There must be sufficient balance in the bank account of the customer. Even it has been insisted by section 31 of the Indian Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 that the paying banker has to honor the customer check only when there is a sufficient balance. What do we mean by sufficient balance or sufficient funds? Sufficient balance or sufficient funds refers to it is that amount which is just sufficient to pay the customer's check. That is very important. In case if the balance to the credit of the customer's account is not sufficient to pay the check, the paying banker should have to return the check with a remark as not sufficient fund or insufficient fund. But while assigning the reason for dishonor of the customer check, every care has to be taken by the paying banker. He should have to give the reason as not sufficient fund or insufficient fund. But under any circumstances, the paying banker should have to write the remark as no funds. No funds indicate that there is no single paisa in the bank account of the customers. This remark, this reason held libelous or defamatory, and the person to whom the check has been given by the customer of the bank, he can file a suit in the court of law, defamation case in the court of law against the customer who has given the check. Then another one important precaution to be taken by the paying banker. When the check is presented for payment, before that check is going to be passed for payment to cash counter, the paying banker should have to see that whether the check has been signed by the customer or not. Check is signed, no doubt. Signature of the check is there, but it is being put by the customer. The paying banker should have to verify whether the signature made by the customer is tallying with the specimen signature or not. That is very important. Specimen signature that we all know. While we are going to open the account in the bank, we used to give the specimen signature. Banker insists on the prospective customer to give the model signature or specimen signature. The paying banker should be very careful whether the signature made on the check is tallying with the specimen signature or not. Then in case if the signature made on the check does not tally with the specimen signature, paying banker should not honor the customer check under any circumstances. It should be returned by the banker with the remark as signature differs. Then another one important precaution to be taken by the banker is the paying banker should have to see that whether the check bears any material alteration. Material alteration. Whether any changes have been made in the check, in the content of the check, either with regard to the date of the check, amount of the check, or with regard to the name of the payee. Is there any alteration? In case if any alterations are made in the check which is presented for payment, the paying banker should have to see that whether that alteration is duly confirmed by the drawer of the check with his signature. On confirming this, the paying banker should have to make the payment of the check. In case the alteration is there in the check but it is not confirmed by the drawer of the check should not be paid by the banker. It should be returned with a remark as the material alteration requires the drawer's confirmation. This is one of the important precautions. Then in addition to this, another one important precaution, the paying banker should have to see that whether the check presented by the customer is presented during the business hours of the bank. Business hours of the bank is very important. Banks are the business institution. They are doing the business of banking, such as acceptance of deposit, repayment of deposit, lending of the funds. All these are constituted as a business of the bank. Business hours of the bank is different and working hours of the bank is different. Working hours of the bank refers to, of course, working hours and business hours varies from one bank to another bank according to the convenience of the particular locality where the banks are being situated. The business hours and working hours varies. Whether the check presented for payment by the customer or by the payee of the check is presented during the business hours of the bank. Working hour is different, as I told. Working hours, these are the hours during which the bank works. But business hours, that is quite different. Business hours are the hours during which the bank transacts its business. Say bank starts by 10:30, of course closes by working hours, closes by 5:30. And the bank which starts by 10:30, its business hours sometimes closes by 2:30 or 3:30. The presentment of check during the business hours of the bank is very important rather than payment of the customer check. Whether the check presented for payment is presented during the business hours of the bank, say for example 10:30 to 3:30. Within 10:30 to 3:30, check should be presented. Then only it should be honored. In case if the check presented for payment outside the business hours of bank, either before 10:30 or after 3:30, it should not be honored by the banker, as the payment made outside the business of the bank is not at all a payment in due course. Then another important precaution to be taken by the banker is whether the check has been presented by the customer or by the payee within the reasonable time from the date of its issuance. What constitutes a reasonable time? Reasonable time is 3 months. Reasonable time is 3 months. Check should be presented for payment within 3 months from the date of its issue. Formerly it was 6 months. That means checks were valid. Checks were back in the past for 6 months from the date of its issuance. But now the reasonable time within which the check should be presented from the date of issue has been reduced to 3 months from 6 months. This is one of the important precautions. Another important precaution, the paying banker should have to see that whether the check has been mutilated. In case if the check has been mutilated, it should not be honored by the banker. It should be returned by the banker with a remark as mutilated check. Then last important precaution to be taken by the paying banker is the paying banker should have to see that whether the check bears any endorsement. Endorsement refers to signing one's name on the back of the instrument with a view to transfer the money or the property contained in the check from one person to another person. That is a mode of negotiating an order negotiable instrument. Sometimes, with a view to transfer the money contained in the instrument, the holder of a check or payee of the check may endorse the check in favor of another person. When such a check bears, which is being presented for payment, bears an endorsement, the paying banker should have to see that who is an endorsee, to whom, in whose name the check has been endorsed. While making payment, he should not make the payment of the check which contains the endorsement not to the payee whose name is mentioned on the face of the check, but to the endorsee whose name is being written on the back of the check. In this way, all these precautions, when the check is being presented for payment by the customer, he has to observe, he has to take all these precautions in connection with the payment of the customer check. Otherwise, he will have to face or expose to some risk, as section 31 that clearly insists. When the banker fails to make the payment without observing certain formalities, he has to pay compensation to customers. So here, for that purpose, instead of paying compensation, instead of exposing to some risk, it is better for the banker to observe or follow certain precautions. So precaution is better than curing. With these few words, that I would like to conclude the topic on the paying banker and the precautions to be taken by the paying banker while making the payment of the customer checks. Thank you. Thanks for viewing my video. Thank you one and all.